Morning, gang. Just wrapped up our morning cardio, 45 minutes incline walking. Just some chill, steady state, chipping away bit by bit. I'm leaning out right now. And so just getting that little 300 calorie burn head start on the day, along with getting my blood flowing, helping me wake up. Great way to start the day. It's about 7 a.m. right now. And this topic was just on the top of my mind. I had to make a video about it, right? Because I was reading this book, Outlive, by Dr. Peter Attia, very well-known doctor, researcher, big on like longevity. And one of the first quotes in the book that stood out to me, and this isn't verbatim, but people can continue to fall in the river, right? We can keep pulling them out of the river. But until we go upstream and figure out why they're falling in the first place, nothing's going to change. And so the entire premise of the book is proactivity instead of reactivity, right? Because the way the health system is now, it's like a doctor isn't getting paid enough to, tell you to change your diet or monitor your glucose, right? Or your insulin, whatever it is. But when you do get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they get a nice kickback from insurance to diagnose the insulin, right? And so it's a deep rabbit hole, but the point is everything nowadays is geared towards treatment rather than prevention. And a few examples in my life where this was just pretty evident was like, number one, for me personally, my knee surgery. I was constantly just training in a single plane, just back squat, Bulgarian split squat, a lot of strength training. I would stretch, but it wasn't like anything worthy of preventing injury. I had no focus on mobility, right? And I was also overtraining. The way I was training was not sustainable. It was pretty stupid. It was like barbaric, like young, high testosterone, like, I'm not going to take a rest day, blah, blah, blah. And all of this stuff led me to an injury, right? And so upon getting hurt, I was told like, oh, rest it, ice it, do the rehab. Now we're in treatment phase. But if I could have stepped backward and done prevention, I would have trained mobility the way I do now. I would have mimicked the training frequency that I have now, allow my body to rest and recover. It wouldn't have only focused on singular planar training. Would have trained in multiple planes, side to side movement, not just like front and back, right? Work on rotational power. There's a bunch of stuff I would have done differently to prevent that from happening. And now I had to touch the hot stove in order to incorporate that into my training to get the proper results of preventing injury, feeling good, feeling more mobile, and just not having to worry about getting hurt again, right? And one example that we were talking about this morning, my dad's dealing with like this low back pain, right? And now he's in the treatment phase because he already has the pain. But if he had been doing proper exercises to strengthen his hips, his abductors, his adductors, activate his glutes, mobilize his hips, strengthen his spine, right? So all the stuff that we're trying to work on now by doing banded isos for the hips, working some back stuff, just like Jefferson curl, all that stuff. The stuff we're doing now to try and put out the fire could have been done years in advance to prevent the fire to begin with, right? And so this is extremely huge when it comes to strength training to prevent yourself from being fragile, right? Bone density, having the strength to withstand certain forces. This comes from mobility to help prevent injuries, where you're strong in traditionally considered compromising positions where other people would get hurt. But even for diet, right? My grandfather had a stroke. His arteries were all clogged up. And upon having the stroke, you can't do anything about it. At that point, once it's happening, all we can do now is try to rehab his speech, help him to try and walk again. But leading up to that, what actually caused his arteries to be clogged? Well, the main drivers of that, simply put, oxidized LDL, damaged LDL, an imbalance between HDL and LDL, and then triglycerides. Triglycerides are actually like the biggest driver of clogging up like arteries. And then, second would become oxidized LDL. And so you look at that, it sounds like a bunch of fucking fancy hoopla. But what causes that? See how we're just taking steps further and further back to find the root cause and not the symptom. Prevent so that we don't have to treat. Well, the main driver of triglycerides and oxidized LDL, things that will clog your arteries, processed foods, and seed oils. My grandfather was not worried about his diet. I don't think many people his generation were really worried about their diet. But maybe if he had eaten less processed foods, less seed oils, and also just monitor his health. Like, it's not the only thing, but there's certain preventative measures you can take. So now I'm hugely focused on, and getting my parents and the rest of my family and you guys as well on my Instagram, if you follow me, you know, I'm huge on animal-based. I'm huge on whole foods, right? Because when we eat animal-based, we're getting healthy dietary cholesterol. We're not getting the oxidized LDL that will damage and clog up our arteries. Minimal triglycerides, because triglycerides mainly come from processed sugars, processed foods. And if we're limiting all of that, we're being proactive. So we're greatly reducing the chances of some cardiovascular disease or even a metabolic disease like a type 2 diabetes. And so if we can prevent in as many areas of our life as possible, then we're increasing our longevity tenfold instead of arriving at a fucking problem and then having to face it and figure it out right then and there in a split second, where we could have spent years eliminating the likelihood of it occurring to begin with. In the book Outlive, Dr. Peter Attia describes the 4 horsemen of just what collects the most deaths as, forgive me if I mess this up, cancer, neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's, dementia, metabolic disease like diabetes, etc., and then a cardiovascular event like a heart attack, stroke, etc. The funny thing is, exercise can greatly help with the cardiovascular event, the neurodegenerative side of things, as well as, to a degree, the metabolic side of things. You know, cancer I'm not well versed on, but exercise can help with all of that. Proper dieting can help with the cardiovascular side of things, keeping your arteries and bloodways clear. The metabolic side of things, keeping your insulin, blood glucose levels at a safe spot. And then also the neurodegenerative side of things, I'm sure certain foods induce that quickly. The sauna helps with the neurodegenerative side of things. There's studies for like Swedish people that when they did it 4 times a week at 20 minutes, decreased the likelihood of Alzheimer's dementia. Sauna also helps greatly with cardiovascular risks, right? So there are certain things we can do now. So if we exercise regularly, if we eat clean, we utilize longevity tools such as the sauna, cold plunge, etc., doing cardio. Well, now we're greatly eliminating 3 of the 4 horsemen that collect the most deaths on like an annual basis. But if you go to the doctor when you're like 50 something and you haven't been doing this your entire life, you get diagnosed with cancer, by the time it's actually detectable, it's way harder to fend off. By the time any of those 4 horsemen are detectable, it's almost like too little too late. So how can we spend the most amount of time preventing? This is why I've organized my training the way that I have. Strength training is the easy part. I don't think anyone has a hard time doing progressive overload and strengthening their bodies. They're getting greater bone density, whatever, to be more resilient to like when they fall, they don't fucking break a hip, right? Mobility is a bit underused. People don't really utilize mobility properly or as much as they should to prevent injuries and compromising positions, like when they're picking something up and then just pulling out their back, or they take a misstep and then they fucking pull or tear something in their hip, whatever it is. That's underutilized for sure. Dieting, definitely highly neglected by the American population, 100%. Alcohol use definitely contributes to that as well. Alcohol use definitely fucks up metabolically, cardiovascularly, definitely induces Alzheimer's dementia quicker. If it doesn't, I'd be fucking shocked. And then cancer, I'm sure it can definitely cause, 100%, like some fucking liver cancer, whatever it is. So people drink way too much. People eat too many processed foods. But that's why I focus on an animal-based diet. I don't drink. So I'm not saying you don't have to ever drink in your life, but I prioritize whole foods, clean carbohydrates, so unprocessed sugars, and things that are super rich in micronutrients to work all like the behind the scenes things. That way, I know that if I'm eating whole foods and unprocessed foods and sugars, etc., I'm going to have healthy dietary cholesterol. My cholesterol levels, HDL, LDL, are going to be balanced because high cholesterol isn't inherently bad. It's just when there's an imbalance between HDL and LDL. I know with my diet, I'm not getting a lot of triglycerides, if any. And so therefore my blood panels are clean. I know it's promoting my hormone health. I know that I'm giving my brain clean fuel. I know that metabolically I'll never have to worry about some diabetic shit. And then also I'm sure processed foods can induce some sorts of cancer as well when you're constantly just getting all this bullshit into your body. So everything, all of the pillars of my training are in that prevention mechanistic phase. I feel like I've been rambling a little bit, but I'm getting to the main point. It's like when you can develop a system that prevents, for example, the 4 horsemen, or prevents you from getting injured, or prevents like any of these things, then we don't have to try and put out a fire on a moment's notice when it happens, but you're unprepared. And I just feel like addressing the root causes more would help way more people. But it takes you to look in the mirror and be brutally honest and critical of your current situation. Because if you look in the mirror right now, and I'm challenging you on the other side, and you don't have visible abs, even just like the slightest bit, it's very likely you have too much visceral fat. It's very likely you're at a greater risk of some cardiovascular event. It's very likely that you're more inclined to a metabolic disease because you have too much body fat, right? I'm not saying everyone has to have chiseled abs, but if you don't, then you're probably not as healthy as you could be. If you are not confident in a full squat with your knees fully bent all the way like ass full to grass, or you can't do a full Cossack squat or whatever ATG split squat, then your mobility is likely lacking. And if you ever had to break into a sprint, if you ever got caught in an awkward spot where your body demanded a lot of you physically, you are more susceptible to injury. If you don't do any cardio, you never utilize the sauna, you're at a greater risk of a cardiovascular event. And so you have to be honest with yourself, right? Because if you're not honest with yourself now, the doctor is going to be brutally honest with you fucking 20 years from now, and you're going to be facing some serious diagnosis. God forbid, I hope doesn't happen to you, but that's the reality that people end up facing. Honesty now to save yourself in the long haul. As uncomfortable as the truth may be, it's going to serve you for the long term. And so I say all this to say that when you can gear your entire methodology, your way of living, not only around optimizing, but optimizing for the now and preventing for the long term, you're killing two birds with one stone. Because me training athletically preserves my athleticism, my explosiveness, my strength, my mobility, coordination, etc., way into my later years. Me prioritizing mobility reduces the likelihood of injury way into my later years. Me prioritizing animal-based diet, eating whole foods, unprocessed foods, helps me maintain healthy cardiovascular profile, blood panels, all this stuff, metabolically healthy, way into my later years. So I'm starting at age 22, which most people probably don't. I also don't drink, which helps me a ton in every direction, energy, recovery, hormones, etc. But if you can start earlier, even if you're 30, even if you're fucking 40, it is better to get a couple year head start, a 10-year head start, than to arrive at 50 and then you're cooked. And now you can't do anything. You have 6 months to live, but in reality, this thing has been boiling and developing for the past 10 plus years. So I think I just highly challenge you guys to get into a preventative mindset, right? I post every day, my daily routine, how I go about things, how I think about things, and pretty much document everything on my Instagram, just all throughout the day, every day. So check that out if you haven't. I'll put it in the description. And if you want to work to implement this animal-based diet, mobility, athleticism, you can send me a DM as well. But for you guys, there's plenty of resources out there. Just start eating whole foods. Start prioritizing a bit of mobility within your training. Start doing a bit of cardio to just get ahead of any cardiovascular event. Introduce the sauna for longevity. And when you start and you do an audit of your current routine and how it serves for the long term, and then you can implement things to serve for the long term, you'll feel better in the now, and you'll save yourself financially and health-wise in the long term. You have a laundry list of problems until you have a health problem, especially one of great magnitude, such as one of the four horsemen: cancer, metabolic disease, a neurodegenerative disease, or what's the last one that I'm missing? Cancer, metabolic, neurodegenerative, or cardiovascular event. So yeah, I appreciate you guys for watching. Hopefully you're able to take something away from this video and be proactive within your own life. I'm about to get to some work on my computer, start working on some client fulfillment, because I want to start implementing all this preventative stuff more so and put a greater emphasis on this, because my clients understand, like, okay, yeah, we're eating animal-based, we're doing mobility, we're training athletically, we're doing cardio, but I want them to internalize the why, because even beyond our coaching, like the amount of time I'm coaching them, I want this to just be super emphasized within their brain for them to navigate this for the rest of their life. Because that's my goal. I don't want to make a dependence upon me for a couple months and then just send them on their way. Like, dude, I want to equip them with the knowledge and with the perspective that I have so that they can be successful with this for as long as possible and stay as healthy as long as possible. But that's enough for me. I'm going to go make some breakfast, get started on my day. Appreciate you guys for watching. Peace, love, prosperity, the whole nine.